Hi, everyone. Welcome back to day one of our Makers Festival. We are joined here today by Doughnut Economics Action Lab, who are going to talk to us about the work they're doing when it comes to driving locally rooted systemic change. And Impact Hub and Doughnut Economics Action Lab, or DEAL, as we sometimes call them, have been working together with some intent this year to open up DEAL's resources to the network to support impact hubs and communities apply donut economic principles and methodologies to their work. And we're also exploring ways that we can work together more strategically for broader place-based systems change within cities and regions as well. So that's a longer explorative piece of work that we are collaborating on. So just want to really thank Leonora, Kate, and Erin today for joining us to share more about their work and what that means for Impact Hub Network and how we can work together. So welcome to this space. Thanks so much for your time. And I will hand over to Erin, who can tell us a bit more about our collaboration.
Thanks, Tom. I'll make a very brief introduction to why we're excited at Doughnut Economics Action Lab to be collaborating with impact hubs around the world. For us, the new economy movements are an exciting way to sort of drive change, and we know that impact hubs in so many places are working at a grassroots level to drive change with entrepreneurs in particular, but with business leaders, with local communities, and with municipalities and cities. We're trying to create tools. We're supporting a broader community of practice, and we're really excited to see a broad range of impact hubs engage with those tools, be a part of the Doughnut economics community of practice as well, and to collaborate to drive the kind of change that we all want to see. So you're going to hear from my colleagues, Kate Rayworth, who's going to talk much broader about the concepts and some of the change that's beginning to come through, the action that's beginning to be unlocked, as well as my colleague Leonora, who will focus a lot more on what's happening at a cities level, at a place-based change level, and from myself, and I will present on the opportunities to engage with businesses, whether those are existing companies in local communities or startups and early stage businesses as well. And we've got particular tools and concepts that can be helpful to drive the kind of change that can get humanity into the donut. But with that said, I will pass to my colleague, Kate.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everybody. Great to join you here. I'm going to share my screen and talk about the concept of donut economics. So I'm going to kick off and just talking about it as an idea. And then Leonora and Erin will give examples of what it means to actually put these ideas into practice. So donut economics. Let's start with economics. I studied economics at university in the 1990s. And this is what I call 20th century economics. It's the core foundational ideas of economics that still dominate the world today. The starting point is supply and demand. It's the market. It puts the market and prices as the metric of concern. It puts this at the center of our vision without starting with a bigger picture of what are we here for? What are we trying to do? What is the whole economy? It's too narrow. It makes rational economic man the portrait of ourselves, a man standing alone, money in his hand, ego in his heart, calculator in his head, nature at his feet. He hates work, loves luxury, knows the price of everything, and can never get enough. If we carry on telling ourselves that this is who we are, we actually start to become this model of man. There's no way we can thrive 10 billion people on this planet if that's who we think we are. We need to remake our own self-portrait. And we need a different goal because it is not endless growth of GDP. That dominated the 20th century, and we still hear it in the growth narrative of politicians. But we all know far too much about the delicate balance of life on this planet, about the needs of people, to think that a growing GDP is a sufficient measure of the goal we have. So we need to reimagine. We also have to recognize that this century has begun with multiple crises, from financial meltdown, climate breakdown, a protest crackdown in many countries, the COVID lockdown. Crises are making themselves visible and making clear the connections between people and the connections of humanity and the rest of the living world. And that these crises hit with extreme inequalities of gender, race, of global north and global south, of wealth and power. We need a new way of thinking about economics that actually centers our well-being and centers our ability to thrive and cope with the crises that we've now locked in. So I wrote Doughnut Economics as a response against the economics I was taught. I read all the economics I had never been introduced to, and there were some brilliant ideas in it, from ecological and feminist and complexity and behavioral, institutional economics. I brought them together in the name of Doughnut Economics so they would dance on one page. And today I'm going to show some of those ideas to you, and then Leonora and Erinch will show what it means actually to take them off the page and put them into practice. So let's start with a goal. What are we here for? What would success look like? And that's what the Doughnut aims to do. Think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of that picture. The goal here is to leave no one in the hole, leave no one falling short on the essentials of life without everything that we all need to thrive. These social dimensions from health and education, food, housing, income, water, these are crowdsourced from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means the governments of the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to be left in that hole. But as we seek to meet our needs and our wants collectively, we also risk going over this ecological ceiling, which is made up of the 9 planetary boundaries, the life-supporting systems identified by Earth system scientists, that together make this unique and delicately balanced living planet thrive and survive. They reproduce the conditions of life. So we'd be crazy to kick ourselves out. So the goal in the simplest of terms is leave no one in the hole and don't overshoot the limits. We need to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. This is a very different goal from aiming for endless growth. It's measured in the metrics of life itself. But if this is the goal, we are very far from that right now. All the red here shows billions of people worldwide falling short on the essentials of life, overshooting at least 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. We need to come into this green donut shape from both sides at the same time. And that means we need to remake and rethink from theory to policy to the design of business. This is a time for deep redesign. Now, this is a global donut. Let's take it down to 4 nations across the spectrum of the world. Malawi, massive human shortfall, but not overshooting their share of planetary boundaries. China has a double whammy challenge here. The UK and the US, high incomes, but still inequality means some people are left falling short. A massive overshoot of planetary boundaries. Let's put these 4 in a context of over 50 countries on this scatter plot. There's the 4 I just showed you. The sweet spot where every country should be aiming for is that little green donut in the top left-hand corner. That's where countries meet the needs of all. They rise up to meet people's needs, but come back within the means of the planet to do so. So let's recognize that not a single country is there yet, that we all need to change. Costa Rica is closer than any other, that we're also profoundly interconnected. And I say this as a British woman in the UK, by histories of colonialism, by military and corporate power, so dominant today, by trade and finance rules, by resource extraction in global supply chains, by the current and future impacts of climate and ecological breakdown. So we need transformation within nations, but also between. Pursuing growth has tended to take countries in this direction, straight past that sweet corner. So just going for GDP growth doesn't take us there. It takes us actually away from there in the end. What if we can reorient nations so that the low-income nations rise, the middle-income nations reorient towards the donut, high-income nations reduce their overshoot, and finally meet people's needs? All 3 of these pathways are unprecedented. This is an absolute transformation of the direction of economic progress. And we need a rebalancing between nations, make that reparations or return of stolen land or redistribution of wealth, of technology, of power, of voice in global institutions. A lot of rebalancing is required to make possible this transformation of nations. We can judge all policies, all designs against whether or not they are helping to take countries in these directions. What kind of economic mindset, though, would give us a starting point for getting there? Not supply and demand. Here's the embedded economy. Let's start by recognizing the economy is a subset of society dependent upon social and political institutions, a subset of the living world. and needs to work within the cycles of the living world. Let's recognize that we need the market and the state and the household and the commons as means of provisioning for our daily needs and wants, and that we are part of the web of life. We are part of nature, and that we're not actually that rational, individualized, competitive, self-interested creature. We are pro-social, profoundly relational, reciprocal beings. We depend upon one another and need to design our economies to bring out that best pro-sociality of our personalities. We also need to recognize we need to change the deep dynamics of our economies. We've inherited linear, degenerative economies that run down Earth's life support systems. How can we instead bend those arrows around and make them regenerative or circular or cyclical so that resources are used again and again? We regenerate the conditions of life. Some examples of moving towards that regenerative future can come whether it's from retrofitting buildings or creating cities that are nestled in ecosystems, this sponge city here in Kunli in China, whether it's making companies regenerative in manufacturing. Can their factories be as generous as the forest next door, sequester carbon, not release it? Can they capture and clean the water rather than pollute it? And can we make transport systems and energy systems that are low carbon and highly collective in the sense of common access to everyday resources? So from degenerative to regenerative, but also we've inherited divisive economies that capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few. Can we make them distributive ones? Because there's no chance we're getting to the donut as humanity in this extraordinarily divisive world. Can we create housing that's affordable for all? Can we own energy in ways that are owned by the community so the returns go to the community, not off to distant shareholders? Can we create companies that are owned by their employees or by their customers or by a co-op, owned in ways that actually enable them to bring the full values of social and environmental care to the way that company is stewarded and governed? Can we create cities that actually reinvest with anchor institutions, reinvest in the thick web of the local economy? So these are just some examples of what it means towards regenerative design. I've given a very quick overview here of moving from 20th century economic thinking to 21st century economic thinking. So how can we start to put these ideas into action? Well, when the Doughnut was first published 12 years ago, very soon city councillors or town councillors started saying, what would it mean to do this in our place? Communities wanted to know. So we've created a tool called Doughnut Unrolled, and I'll quickly show you here what it means. And I invite you, wherever you are, whatever locality or city or town or district you're in, think about applying this idea right where you are. So we take the donut. How could our city or place live in the donut? Let's unroll it to make space to ask this question. How could your city or place become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? Complex question. So we break it into what we call 4 lenses. On the one side, there's the local aspirations for thriving people in a thriving place. On the other side are global responsibilities of connection, respecting the health of the whole planet and the well-being of all people. Let me show you briefly these 4 lenses. How can all the people of our city thrive? What would it mean for everybody where you are to meet those essentials of life and of well-being? Food, health, education, housing. This is the social foundation inside the donut. That is, of course, a local conversation to determine what that looks like, what that means according to local custom, resources, histories. How do we determine this locally? Then ask ourselves, how can our place be as generous as the wildland next door? Because nature has a genius everywhere on Earth. In each location, she's figured out how to sequester carbon instead of release it. She's figured out how to store groundwater instead of having flash floods. She's figured out how to cool the air on a hot day with the forests rather than an urban heat island effect. Can we create cities and settlements and agriculture that actually mimic the generosity of nature so that we create settlements that actually belong in the ecosystem they're part of? And of course, these are going to be far more climate resilient settlements that we definitely need that attribute in the places we live. Thinking globally now, can we come back within those planetary boundaries, that overshoot, and respect the health of the whole planet, cutting energy use and carbon emissions, cutting material through flow so that we live within planetary boundaries? and then thinking of people who we're connected to worldwide. Think first of all the people who stitch the clothes we wear, who assemble the phones we use, who picked and packed the food we eat. Are they paid living wages through global supply chains? Thinking of the people who are impacted by climate and ecological breakdown now in ways that we know are affected by our own lifestyles. What do we owe to those people now? What action do we owe them? Thinking of a culture of welcome for migrants. How are they received when they arrive seeking refuge? What's the policy of welcome? What is a nation's trade, finance, negotiative policies that are impacting other countries and their chance of ever thriving? So these are the 4 lenses of the Doughnut Unrolled. And this tool has been put into practice by communities and by local governments. We are learning so much back from them of how to turn ideas and take them off the page and put them into practice. I'm going to stop here and hand over to Leonora because she can really tell the story from the point of view of cities.
I thought Erinch was going next, but Erinch, should I go?
You go, Leonora. I'll follow you.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, Kate. So I'll give me a second to start sharing my screen. Right. So we are now at a place few years after these ideas really started being put into practice, where there are many local governments, local and regional governments from around the world that have started putting them into practice, started experimenting in various ways. So we have this very alive and evolving experimental community of practice from Barcelona to Amsterdam, from Thimphu in Bhutan to Nanaimo in Canada, from Mexico City to Wellington. We've had over 90 different places started to, in different ways, to explore what they can do with doughnut economics, and over 50 have now formally brought the ideas into some sort of policies, strategies, and processes. But before I talk a bit more about what that looks like in practice and what has been the role of the city and the different various change makers in different places to put that into practice, we really start with the question of what does it mean to be aiming for the doughnut as a city, as a region, as a neighborhood, or as a municipality? And it's really big question. But essentially, what it means is changing the goal, changing the vision, the end destination, how we reimagine the future towards thriving in balance, towards meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, looking at the doughnut and at that doughnut unrolled that Kate just showed, asking that question: how can our place become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So, but it also means using the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist, to be reflecting on our pathways, our transition pathways, the changes, the deep systemic and structural changes that we need in our local governments, in our organizations, in our patterns of working and thinking today to move towards a different tomorrow. However, the reality of cities and regions, of local governments, of the public sector is really complex and really different from place to place. Everybody has different national and local policies, different budget and policy cycles, different political situations, different socio-geographic situations, different communities, and different complexities. So in reality, everyone takes a very different journey in engaging with these ideas. So how does it look like in practice? On one side, we as DEAL have been creating and continue to create, as we learn from the practice, a lot of these freely available tools and resources that change makers, that cities then take, adapt, contextualize, turn into policies, turn into processes. We have cities innovating, experimenting, and learning by doing, by using these tools, but also just by using the concepts and the ideas to reinvent their own tools, their own kind of new processes. And then we have been fostering this kind of growing community of practice where there's a lot of focus on peer-to-peer learning, on like, jointly experimenting and learning from your peers in other places, something that you are all, of course, very familiar with. So we have this evolving practice of what is actually happening on the ground. And in the world of local governments and cities and regions working with donut economics, there has been a lot of flexibility on how they play out in practice. But here are some of the common ways in which cities have been engaging with donut economics, and the common, let's say, motivators that have brought them through these concepts. So we have places using the ideas as basis for new conversations and redefining sustainability. Very often the interest is coming from climate departments, sustainability departments, organizations working with them in partnership with them that have identified the need to build a much broader understanding of sustainability, often to get out of the tunnel vision of focusing on climate only or on CO2 emissions, the need to be thinking more holistically and be combining the social and ecological perspective, the need to focus on planetary boundaries and to think about sustainability as nature's and humans as part of nature, and nature and humans thriving in balance. For many, donut economics is about setting new visions and reimagining the future. So really using the donut as a new compass, a new type of North Star, helping us think about a new type of vision of the future and setting new transition pathways towards it in a more informed way, where we have a set of social and ecological themes to guide us. And linked to that is, for many places, the need to define new metrics of how we're actually doing as places. So we have developed methodologies based on those 4 lenses that Kate shared to define kind of the donut of your own place, a data portrait of a place based on donut economics, that for many places becomes this diagnostic of the state of the place that then helps guide us, helps us prioritize, plan, budget, helps us build new collaborations and identify cross-sectoral problematic areas that need to be turned into strategic priorities, etc. For many places, these ideas have been a strong tool for dialogue. So just the holistic nature of the concepts and of the tools of the donut unroll of these 4 lenses lend themselves very well to crossing themes, bridging between those working in social areas and ecological areas, between city governments, the private sector, the civil society, between residents and policymakers. So it's become a tool for workshops, for visioning, for planning, for collaborating, for co-designing really with a new common understanding. And then often there's been this growing interest and tendency to use the ideas also as a tool for decision making and impact assessment. So really assessing the impact of projects, policies, and based on their social and ecological impact through the lenses of donut economics, and guiding our decisions more holistically. So I'll just kind of talk through some examples of some places and what they've been doing with donut economics. In Valence-Romans, this is in France, the work really actually started from an impact hub or a variation of an impact hub that was formed and funded by a local government. That was this organization meant to support and sustain the creation of new startups with a socio-ecological focus. And as this organization was working, supporting these new small types of progressive businesses, while at the same time collaborating with a local government, they really identified the mismatch between the type of ambition and velocity of work that was happening in the business sector versus how things look like in the policymaking sector. And this is where they brought in donut economics as a model that could help them start looking at the local government-led strategic projects through a new, more ambitious, holistic lens, to broaden their understanding of sustainability and to think more deeply about their potential impact. So they developed this sort of impact assessment approach where they assess each of their initially 20 and a growing number of strategic projects, each done in collaboration with various city actors through the social and ecological lenses of the donut, assessing whether they're having positive or negative social and ecological impact. So if you look at the inner circle and the outer circle, you'll see the impact of a given example project on each of these adapted and contextualized topics. And this way they would develop these sort of indicators, tracking each of these projects, steering them kind of year by year, aiming to bring a more holistic type of collaboration and thinking about the impact through the lenses of donut economics from the onset and throughout the implementation of projects. And that's where the work has started and now continues to evolve into looking at kind of the next steps of looking at the bigger impact of all of these projects on the territorial development. In a very different example, in Brussels, the work started from the regional government and the Department for Economic Transition that was really looking for a new paradigm, bringing new types of metrics to measure progress that goes beyond GDP. And that's where they come to think about the economy in different ways. And that's what brought them to Doughnut Economics. And they had been collaborating with a local nonprofit and the business and a local business school, the researchers from a business school, to work with Doughnut Economics as what they called 4 levels. So to working at the many different levels, both at the macro level, creating this, what you see is the big portrait of Brussels. So the state of place, the common compass of where and how the place is currently going and where change is needed, where those red wedges that need to be turned around. But then working at the different levels of the many actors that can be impacting this kind of big portrait. So through policies at the meso level, looking at this reverse triangle on the left, through various individual business, nonprofit, residential, grassroots actors at a micro level, and through individual actions at the nano level. So one of the kind of flagships policies that they've developed has been this regional strategy for economic transition, looking at that meso level, which is this where they've redefined how the region, how the public sector invests and supports businesses and industries. So building these new definitions based on Doughnut economics of exemplary businesses, exemplary companies that are those that aim for certain social and ecological impacts. And they're gradually have been building this into their regulatory tools, their financing tools, their subsidies, their regional banks and other financial and regulatory tools for different types of support for businesses, so that they really only aiming towards 2030 support primarily the businesses that are aiming for positive social and ecological impact. And at that micro level, they've been working with various, individual businesses, companies, organizations that are questioning their own organization, their own impact, their own projects, rethinking, how these ideas can be turned into different sort of actions for different sorts of actors in the territory. In yet a different example, in Barcelona, the city has worked with the university primarily to again begin from creating this data portrait of a place. So this thing that you see on the left there, Barcelona's donut portrait of how they're currently doing. And then that for them became the basis of rethinking and reworking the common agenda for action of these huge sustainability territorial partnerships of 2,000 organizations called Barcelona Sostenible, and their 10-year commitment that is essentially this agenda document that all of these actors commit to take action based on in the next 10 years, jointly tackling the biggest common challenges that in their case were identified to be decarbonization and water resource. In a very different kind of example, just glimpsing through the various scales at which various actors and at the territorial scale have been engaging with these ideas. In a small town in Sweden called Tomelilla, they've been using donut economics in different ways. And one of them has been through the procurement, this planning, design, and now gradually implementation of a new school. So there's been a lot of interest in the built environment, in the planning, architectural, construction sectors in donut economics. There's sectors that lend themselves pretty naturally to these holistic ideas, I've found, which is why these interests have been growing. And places, local governments, often in collaboration with various actors, in this case, kind of strategic thinkers and planners and architects, use built environment project as testing grounds, in this case, a school, to be really rethinking not only how we build, create, how we reduce our climate impact and the need for energy by completely different type of organization as an educational institution, how we make flexible installations, how we build from materials that were from the site, how we use the site to grow food for the students there, how we redesign the school with students, but even how we rethink the educational program for the 21st century so that school itself is the building ground for the development of these ideas. So the municipality is also continuing to work with a lot of local actors using this opportunity as a testing ground from many, many different points of view. And final example I'll share is in Amsterdam, the first city that started working with donut economics, where one of the, my timer, where one of the core way in which they started building the ideas into their strategic processes was in their circularity policy that they redefined based on the ideas of donut economics, where they brought in more strongly the ideas of social justice, where they brought in more strongly the notion of planetary boundaries and the need to be looking at the impact of our places in other places of the world, and not just our local footprint, but rather our global social and ecological footprint. And they've now been working through an implementation agenda that really involves the city working with all the different actors in the territory, that helps them to identify where are the structural barriers to implementation, to more progressively kind of putting these ideas into practice. So to wrap up, just kind of to repeat a bit why the key reasons why we've been learning that places look to donut economics, it's been because it's given them new and ambitious way to talk about sustainability and tools for a new transformative agenda. It's because it's holistic framework that kind of helps build bridges and bridge silos internally and externally in organizations. It's been often because of its strong visualization that helps to mobilize, to communicate complexity, to build kind of buy-in politically, technically, practically. It's offered new ways to measure progress and measure the impact of decisions. And finally, it really resonates with many because it offers a narrative of hope and optimism where everybody can clearly see their role and start kind of building a common approach. I'll stop sharing here. This is if you want to know more about what's happening practically in the world of local government, I can share a link to a guide that we're actually publishing, the update of this guide today with a lot of case studies from all around the world. And I'll pass it on to Erinch.
Thank you, Leonora. That's, I think, packed full of insights and opportunities for impact hubs in different parts of the world to engage in change in relation to cities and municipalities. And I hope that there's a lot of inspiration to be taken from there. Just looking through the people that are in this session, I was just absolutely blown away by the diversity of the world that's represented, and that's something that we really share at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, to try to make some of these concepts as universal as possible, as relevant as possible, as adaptable as possible to different contexts. And just sort of, I couldn't resist but write down some of the places that I saw there, from Lisbon to Lusaka, Kigali to Kathmandu, Istanbul to Inverness, Sao Paulo to San Jose and Stockholm, Basel to Bratislava, and I saw great participation from Tyrol, Rio, Houston, Caracas, Zanzibar, London, Medellin. It's just a really inspiring set of people, and this the makers, the impact makers as a community, I think, of practice is one that's incredibly aligned with what we're trying to drive as well. So I really feel among friends here. I'm just going to share my slides, and hopefully they work as seamlessly as it has for other colleagues, and we will go from there. So hopefully somebody will yell at me if it's not showing the right slides or if it's showing the wrong display settings. But if not, I will click through to sort of give a bit of an introduction to what all of this means if you are a practitioner in the world of business, if you are working with startup founders, with entrepreneurs, with business leaders, with investors. What does Doughnut Economics provide as insights to guide that engagement? Well, firstly, if we build on some of the things that Kate and Leonora have said, there's a pretty big transformation in the economy that we want to drive. And one part of that to highlight is the transformation on the ecological side, a transformation towards becoming ecologically regenerative. And often this means we are fundamentally redesigning and redefining the business models, the revenue models, the products, the services, and the practices and strategies that underpin what business is doing. And there are so many inspirations to draw from on this, from modular product design that Fairphone is doing, from looking at redesigning manufacturing processes and factory setup as interfaces doing, taking some of the ideas Kate mentioned that come from the concept of biomimicry, and to think, how do we create a manufacturing process that makes sure our factory is behaving like a forest and create benefits for local ecology and people, to circularity being embedded into product design that Houdini is doing, to examples like Sanergy, which are taking the human waste from the affordable toilets in Kenya, treating them, sanitizing them, and putting them back into the cycle of the living world and putting them into agricultural use in an effective and sanitized manner.
Erin,
Aren't your slides are not moving in case they were supposed to?
They're not yet. No, I think I'm using the simpler version.
no, we're still looking at your first slide on Doughnut Design for Business.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you need to share your full screen.
Let me try that again. Apologies, guys. You know what? This happened before, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen in this way, and it's going to look less sexy, but I know it works when I do it this way. So the examples I was providing are these ones, from Fairphone to Interface to Houdini to Sanergy. And I'm not going to go into the details of this because I've covered this in earlier webinars, and I will again in future webinars with the Impact Hubs community. But there's also the social side of this. So the socially distributive business models themselves. How do we make sure that worker voice is absolutely implemented in the most fundamental way to the way businesses are operating, decisions are being made, such as models like Creative Handicrafts, which have a co-ownership model, or Richer Sounds, which also have an employee ownership model that embeds this, or examples like Fairbnb, which are bringing in community voice as well as sharing of revenues back into communities, or examples like Lush that are saying, look, how do we make sure we contribute our fair share of tax to make sure the essential services are partly financed through our work? And all of these are wonderful examples of practice, right? All of these are the kind of things we want to see happen. All of these are the kinds of models that many impact hubs around the world are supporting. They're supporting local entrepreneurs that are coming up with interesting product ideas, interesting ways of managing supply chains, and engaging workers, engaging communities or consumers in different ways, creating services that are going to unlock impact in different ways. This feels like the bread and butter of the Impact Hub network. But let's take a step back for a second and think, well, if we want to make these much more the mainstream, we want to scale these out, we want to have these much more prominent and the core part of the global economy, what are the transformations we might need to provide? And a part of that means that we look at across the board at the kinds of transformations, the kind of levers for change that we're seeing happen. Of course, regulation is going to be really critical. And this connects back to some of the ideas that Leonora was mentioning, Kate was mentioning as well. We're going to need to see much more effective regulation of businesses to level the playing field and make sure that those who are going further and pursuing sustainability with more ambition are not disadvantaged in the marketplace, as well as making sure that there are local organized versions of pressure from whether it's workers or consumers or community groups who are able to make sure businesses are pulling in that direction. We're going to need to see leaders step up and drive this kind of change. We're going to need to see much more useful and effective ways of measuring and understanding impact and setting targets. And we're going to need to see businesses making the business case on a broader sense, broader than just the narrow short-term financial perspective that is currently driving so much of business decision making. All of this is critical. But for these all to be effective, what we need also to see that businesses are designed to support and not hinder these efforts, that they reinforce these levers for change. And Doughnut Economics is focused on redesigning business to enable these levers of change to be effective. Unless we have businesses that are designed to pursue these kinds of levers with ambition, they're going to push back against regulation, or they're going to try to circumvent. They might even have capital flight and divest from countries and jurisdictions. We're going to see businesses that hold back enlightened leaders. If we move to targets and metrics, we're going to see businesses that set maybe ambitious targets, but don't follow through with the necessary action and transformation that's needed, as we've seen with, for instance, companies setting science-based targets who haven't followed through with the actions needed to meet those targets. And the business case is going to remain narrow rather than a broader concept of value for society that goes beyond short-term financial metrics. So redesigning business is pivotal if we're going to unlock these kinds of levers for change. And what do we mean by redesigning business? We focus on these 5 layers of design that originate from the thinking and work of the theorist and writer, author Marjorie Kelly from the Democracy Collaborative, who tells us that these 5 layers of business allow us to understand the way we've designed companies and the core of their DNA. The first is the purpose. The first layer is the purpose of the business. What was the business set up to achieve? What are its core products, services, and what is it here to do for society and the planet? The second is its network. So it's network of relationships with all of its different stakeholders. Are these true partnerships, or are these commodified transactional relationships? This includes workers or communities, supply chains, relationships with the rest of the industry, with government. The third is the governance. So these are the decision-making models, the structures of power. The fourth is the ownership model, which underpins so much of this. Who owns this? What kind of rights do owners have? And in what way do they enable or hold back the kind of transformational change that we need to see through the business? And the fifth is finance. It's relationship with finance. What does finance expect and demand? How does it enable or hold back the kind of ambitions that we need? And through understanding these 5 layers of design, we can then ask ourselves, how do we move from the 20th century question that has underpinned the design of business, which is how much value can we extract through this enterprise, and instead move to the 21st century version of the question that must now be embedded into the deep design of business, which is how many benefits can we create through this enterprise? So if we dive into just the quick examples, I think many of you would know these examples. But if we think about purpose, for instance, we can think about Tony's Chocolonely, which has said, look, our purpose is to transform an entire industry. We're here to make 100% slave-free the norm in chocolate. But of course, companies are wordsmithing a purpose all over the world. It doesn't mean that is their true purpose. So that manifests not only on the words on the paper, but in the actual practices of the company, in the prices they pay to their suppliers, in the longevity of their commitment to their suppliers and their commitment more broadly to the industry. And critically and innovatively, it's also been locked in to the design of the company through the mission lock, so guardian shares that they've created. The second example is through the networks, El Puente, which is say, let's have a design of a company where the different stakeholders are all represented on the board, and the different stakeholders are co-owners of this business. So the founders are there alongside the customers of the business, alongside the supply chain and the workers, and they all have an equal seat around the table. Each owns 20% of the business, and the tensions and trade-offs are manifested and internalized in the board. Now, this is roughly a 10 million euro turnover company based out of Germany, importing and distributing products across Northern Europe. The third is governance, and loads of really interesting innovations in governance happening. Sajan is putting nature on the board, that Faith in Nature has done, working with the organization Lawyers for Nature and putting all of the legal documents and the governance design into the commons, into an open source format that others can use, replicate, adapt as needed. The fourth is ownership. We're starting to see some really interesting models of ownership. Patagonia made waves a few years ago now, saying that Earth is now our only shareholder. They used a model called steward ownership to do that, but loads of others are following suit. We're starting to see startups. We're starting to see investment funds that are focused on steward ownership, for instance, such as in the city of Leuven. And we're seeing other models such as employee ownership trusts, different cooperative models, different benefit society models, even models of community ownership and hybrids between these emerge across different places. And lastly, finance. So if we look at how do we design the way the business invests its profits, is it able to invest all of its profits, as in the example of Grameen, the known food company in Bangladesh, in order to make the food as nutritious as possible with those profits? Or is it, extracting most of it for shareholders? What is the relationship in terms of exits of investors, for instance? All of these are design questions. All of these are different ways we can design businesses and help support entrepreneurs and business leaders to make these choices. Of course, finance is a really critical one, particularly for startups and early stage businesses, and putting lots of options on the table is absolutely pivotal. So much of the startup ecosystem is directing entrepreneurs towards venture capital, where they have to demonstrate that over the next 5 to 7 years that they can, get to a multi-million-dollar company, hundreds of millions in most cases, and the eventual model of getting to $1 billion valued unicorn status that achieves 10x return for its investors. That's the pressure that the venture capital model often puts. Most of the world's businesses are not a right fit for that model. And in the process, loads of companies, great ideas, and value is destroyed in pursuing a model that is a poor fit for most enterprises and business ideas. So there's a plethora of alternatives. Organizations like Transform Finance are working with investors. Purpose Economy has got an evergreen purpose fund as well to bring in investment. Examples like Seed Commons are bringing in debt finance and hundreds of millions into the cooperative movement to finance through loans for cooperatives. Loads of alternatives are emerging here to support different ways of designing businesses. There are lots of benefits to business design. I won't go into each of them, but just let you know there's a strong case for resilience. The businesses that design themselves deliberately around these ideas are much more likely to survive in the long term, be embedded in their communities, and build long-term relationships and partnerships. We've just released a huge range of case studies, 14 case studies, more on their way. If you want to know more and do a deep dive into any of these 14, they're all at doughuneconomics.org. If you go to the tools drop down, you'll see a tool there that captures all 14 of them. Some amazing models of co-ownership, of adaptations of governance, of models of proportion of profits that are reinvested, social enterprise structures, employee ownership models, steward ownership models. There's a real broad, deliberately broad range. Some of these are very large companies, some of them are much smaller ones. But I urge you to take a look to get some inspiration when you engage with startups and entrepreneurs. We also have some resources for those that want to think about policy for these kinds of business ideas that I'm talking about. And there's a specific tool for this that we've co-created with others in this space, particularly the University of Colorado Boulder, that looks at city level, provincial level, national level, and international, transnational level policy that can support businesses to be set up in this way to foster businesses along these lines. And the main tool that I'm talking about that helps any practitioner, and you as a practitioner sitting in an impact hub, you're already registered with us to use this tool. Impact Hubs Global is a core partner for Doughnut Economics Action Lab, is a registered organization. You're registered to use this, and it allows you to run a workshop for businesses. It's got all of the materials within it. It's got all of the canvases to print them out. You can do it online through Miro as well. There's a 2-part training webinar that I've recorded that's available through the website link that you can see at the bottom. But if you go to doughuteconomics.org, go to the themes drop down and click on business and enterprise, all of these resources are there. We've created them so that you don't need to rely on us. You can take it and run with it, run a workshop, but you're also very welcome to get in touch with me if you want to run workshops with businesses. And we have a broader approach around this. And I'll end with just this reminder that the 5 things I thought about when I put myself in your shoes would be, firstly, when engaging with businesses, focus on the practical challenges that are preventing that entrepreneur from pursuing the social or ecological mission. Once you've identified that, you can start looking at very diverse enterprise designs, including existing off-the-shelf models like the ones I've mentioned, but more excitingly, the hybrids, the innovations that are emerging in governance structures, and keeping them quite simple, especially at the early stages, is really important without closing off long-term prospects for what that business can be. So if the wrong kind of deal terms or term sheet is structured from the beginning, it can make becoming a steward-owned company or a hybrid co-ownership community model impossible in the long term. So bring that thinking in early in order to make sure some possibilities remain on the table. Third is redesigning that relationship with investors is key. Fourth is public policy can be a really important way of engaging and unlocking these ideas as well. And the last is it's about design. And this is fun. It's about the future. And we're co-creating something exciting. And we're leaving behind some of the crusty 20th century models that are holding back ambition, holding back change. So with that said, have a look at doughuteconomics.org. We've created the resources for the exactly practitioners like you, so that you can pick them up, you can read through them, you can prepare, and you can run workshops, you can engage on any of the themes that we've been talking about. I'll stop sharing my screen and see what kind of discussion we've got going.
Should we pick up some questions from the chat in the time that we have remaining? Well, who wants? I can start answering this question very briefly from the city's perspective, and say that, one, I can really not speak to the reality on the ground from personal experience, because we have this kind of role as a convener and connector in many places, and we don't personally go and lobby and convince and knock on hard doors. We just learn from those and kind of exchange and with those that do. And I think what in the cities world, what we've often seen is in many cases, cities have actually been convinced, advocated, lobbied by communities, businesses, organizations locally. And that's how they kind of gotten started, by having residents and organizations continuously keep on bringing these ideas in one consultation, in one public discussion, in another assembly. They keep on popping up, and until finally the city kind of starts exploring. So I guess one thing is keep on finding different routes and ways to bring them. But another thing that has happened in places has been different change makers already doing demonstrating projects on the ground that get traction, that get visibility, that inspire, and that kind of gradually attract the curiosity of policymakers to see really what's happening. Well, what can we do about it? Can we support this further? Can we actually put it into practice here as well? So in many places, the action is starting at many levels, or at grassroots community business level, and then gradually makes its way into the city world. But maybe Aaron or Kate want to speak from kind of your perspectives.
I'll just add one thing to that, which is something else we've seen that makes it get started, is the power of peer-to-peer inspiration. So Amsterdam was the first city to incorporate the donut thinking into their circularity policy. It was in April 2020. There was an article in the Guardian newspaper which went viral. And within 6 weeks, the city of Copenhagen voted to explore what this would mean for them, then Brussels, then Barcelona. So we see this ripple effect, and I think of it as peer-to-peer inspiration, but also peer-to-peer permission. It's time. People like us, places like us, are really actually doing that thing now. And so something that we thought was impossible or unrealistic, some place that we see ourselves as being peers, they're actually doing it, which is why for us as Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we amplify that. Leonora showing those examples of cities, something shifts when we move from talking about ideas to actually showing real examples. So we see that as one of the most persuasive things we can do, is show that other places like you are already doing this.
And from a business perspective, I would say two things. If you take a very long-term perspective, these kinds of ideas are the ones that are going to stand the test of time. And the second is, how do we demystify the ideas? Because at the beginning, anything different, new, feels riskier. There's a misperception that it's riskier. It might scare off commercial partners, co-founders, investors potentially. But that need not be the case. If we talk about these ideas, we demystify them, it becomes much easier to implement and we reap the benefits.
Kate, do you want to speak to this question?
Yeah. So what do you believe it will take to make this also the language of economic policy and analysis? Well, I'd say it is starting to be the language of economic and policy and analysis in those local governments that have chosen to adopt it. So we have a strategy of we're not pushing, we're not knocking on shut doors and pushing and lobbying in places where it feels like you're banging your head. We are working with places that want to do it. So working with local governments, and then, as Leonora was showing, learning from them what kinds of tools are useful to you, what kind of language are they using. So starting that locally or city level, I think we're beginning to see some interest from national level, say certainly within the European Commission. Many major cities in Europe are now engaging with this. So it's like they're looking and saying, what is this framing that our major cities are using? So we are learning from policymakers themselves, what is the adjacent possible? What's a feasible way for them to start talking about it? I'll just add that I think that it's harder, at the national level, because so many national governments are really, really locked into the narrative of growth, growth, growth. Like Erin said, when you propose something different, it's as if the risk is with you. And so anybody who proposes anything different from the growth narrative, the onus seems to be on them to explain how this could work, where actually we need to flip that and show that sticking with the mainstream 20th century narrative, this just doesn't work. So we are continuing to work on that and support governments that do start moving in that direction.
And I can okay.
That's definitely for you, Leonora.
This one, if the cities and not interested, well, this would be, I also shared some links in the chat for some of our other colleagues, but we're, as I was saying, in many places, it's not the city that gets the work started, but it's community, it's organizations, it's people coming together and forming informal networks. So that's the link that is shared now in the chat is one that I would suggest exploring to see the action that's getting started that ends up often inspiring the cities to start taking notice. But it also offers a lot of pathways for many of you here individually or as organizations or in various groups in your various roles and capacities to start a movement in your place.
And if I can just add to that, I never underestimate the inspiring potential of impact entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, and networks like you guys who can elevate that and represent some of that futuristic thinking. I've always found that government policymakers can be incredibly influenced by people in the business world that are asking for more ambitious policy. And you have an opportunity, I think, to amplify that. You also have an opportunity to elevate what the local business community, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is saying beyond the immediate needs to something a bit more futuristic. And already so many of you are doing that. We can see that from impact hubs around the world.
So thank you so much, Erinch, Leonora, Kate, for that session. I can tell in the comments and the questions that our network is really engaged in this and really excited to collaborate. We're going to be doing more together. So to everyone watching, keep your eyes peeled on our Slack channels, on the Makers Digest, on our newsletters for opportunities to get involved and do more work and apply all the tools and resources that you've seen today. There's a lot, but we can do it together over the course of the coming months and into 2025. Next up, we have a session on operational excellence for impact hubs. So we look at how the standards we need to have as impact hubs and makers, and how we can develop that excellence so that we can do more of this systemic regenerative work that we know is so important. So do come along to that session, which is starting now. But once again, I just want to thank Doughnut Economics for taking the time to be with us today and get to know us and to help us get to know you. So your time is much appreciated, and thanks for sharing the inspiring work.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming, and see you in the next session, and bye for now.